Hello and welcome to another OnTech webinar. Today we are talking about moving to the cloud. I have here with me today Peter. My name is Dave. I'm an account manager here. Peter is also an account manager. Um, I guess maybe we'll talk a little bit about our backgrounds. I'm a sales guy, so my background isn't that exciting. But Peter, do you want to explain a little bit about your background and how I guess your career in IT and how it maybe will relate to this webinar?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an engineer, IT engineer for 4 years that I'm willing to share.
Okay.
And my focus early on in my career was servers and storage, and so basically helping companies put together their local on-premise hardware, help them keep it updated, help them keep it secure, um, moving into virtualization, and I've been doing that for a long time.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah. So he's definitely our resident expert, all things server related. So I'll probably be asking him questions as we go. But today we're going to be learning about the cloud. What is the cloud? The types of cloud services that are available to you I guess, from a professional standpoint and even a personal standpoint. Some common scenarios for each. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get into everybody's personal, or I guess specifically business related scenarios and what works best. If you're interested after this and you want to learn, what options are available, we can certainly, have that discussion and maybe do a little discovery into your network to see what would be the good route. But yeah, so we'll talk about some scenarios. We'll also talk about benefits, the cost analysis of doing this type of thing. And there's also a Q&A. So we'll leave some questions for the end. If you do have questions throughout and you want to just throw them in the chat, I think that's what Jamie mentioned in the chat. Yes, so
Yep.
Yeah, again, apologize for the technical difficulties, but you are more than welcome to put questions or comments in the chat. We can answer them as we go. But I think without further ado, I think we'll get started. So I hope you can all see my screen moving to the cloud. So what the heck is the cloud? I think a lot of people have heard about this term in the last 10 years, maybe. I know my first experience with the cloud was like on my phone saving pictures. My phone was starting to fill up and they're like, oh, back it up to the cloud. I'm like, I don't know what that means, but okay, sounds good. So what is the cloud? Well, it's really just the location where your resources and data lives, but it's delivered via the internet. So what you're seeing to the right is a picture of what inside a data center looks like. And I'll be honest, even a few years ago, I didn't really know what a data center was or that they even existed. I would highly recommend you go to YouTube and look up the Google data center security video. It is fascinating. This place is basically a military base, just with the security surrounding it. But yeah, so a lot of the stuff that we do nowadays is delivered via the internet. My computer, for instance, just about every application on here is cloud-based. My PC is very lean. There's not much processing going on because I'm just pulling stuff from the cloud. My email is coming from the cloud, you name it. So just, yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize just how much we use the cloud in the day-to-day basis. So the types of cloud services we're going to talk about today are SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. That's how I like to pronounce them. And that more specifically is a software, platform, and infrastructure as a service. And as a service really just means that you're pulling it from somewhere else. It's not locally on your device.
Or in your environment, just generally in your environment. It's a service that somebody else is providing and you're accessing it.
Sure, yeah. So the first one, software as a service, is the one that I think most people will be familiar with because it's very common in personal lives as well. But what this is you're using a program on someone else's hardware. That's really what it comes down to. So for instance, in a business standpoint, your Microsoft Exchange, your email, I should say, Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, those are all cloud applications that you're using I'd say most people here probably are using Office 365. No one really has local Exchange servers anymore.
anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty rare. Um, and Teams obviously is a great collaboration tool, but all of that stuff is happening on Microsoft servers at those data centers. There is no internal communication going from my computer to Peter's when I send him a Teams message. It goes to the internet, comes back down to Peter's machine. So, and then OneDrive and SharePoint. Well, OneDrive is like your personal cloud. Like I mentioned, you can save pictures to it. Um, any type of file you want. SharePoint is what I really consider like a file server. A lot of people still have file servers. SharePoint is the cloud version of that. So if you want to get rid of hardware on site, you're sick of paying the licensing around it, you don't want to buy new hardware every 7 years, you throw it into SharePoint. It is just a software. It is no longer server based. Obviously, there's servers running everything on the back end in those data centers, but you have no operating worries of a server. There's no hardware you have to manage. The operating system you don't have to worry about. It is just a program that you're using.
And very little maintenance and updating and all that kind of stuff. That's all handled by the cloud services provider.
Yep. No patching, no antivirus. It is very lean from our standpoint. And then personally, these are all software as a service programs that I'm sure a lot of you guys use. TurboTax, I just started using that this year. It's amazing. It's super easy to use, but that is not running on my computer. I'm going to a website, which is, a web server that they're basically pushing out to all their users. Netflix is the same thing. It's not like a DVD where I plug it into my TV or I download it onto my TV. I am downloading it from the internet. And the same thing goes with Twitter. No one's tweeting at me. They're tweeting at the Twitter servers, and I'm looking at the Twitter servers to see people's tweets.
Yeah,
So
and
it's,
virtually any app on your phone. There's
yeah,
almost no apps on your phone that aren't connected to a cloud service, right? So the front end is the client only, and it's designed to work with and communicate with the back end services where the data is, where the processing power is that lives up in the cloud.
yeah. Back in the day, I remember having like applications on my phone that I don't think were like stats applications, but my phone would get crazy hot because it is a really big program sitting locally on my phone that's using a ton of processing power, RAM, all that fun stuff. Where now it's much more lean because all of that heavy duty processing power is happening on the server level. So my phone is just bringing it down. Platform as a service, we're not going to spend too much time on this because it's not as common with our clients. But if you remember, using a program on someone else's hardware is what that software as a service is. Platform as a service is developing. So if you have a part of your company is trying to develop applications for your company, you would be using something like this. So these are some common examples. Again, I have very little understanding about any of these products. Peter, maybe you do, but yeah, we don't have many clients that have like a developing team developing applications or a SQL database. So any
Uh,
comments on that, Peter?
yeah, I mean, Azure Files is one of the options. Azure SQL is one of the options that we list. In both of those cases, you have file server perhaps on premise. To want to have a file server on premise, you could migrate all your files to the Azure Files service. And in that case, you wouldn't have a server running in the cloud. You'd just be sticking your files in the cloud. And the same with
Hmm.
SQL. You might have some applications that use SQL. Well, you can theoretically you can move the SQL application, the SQL database that you're using. You can migrate that into the Azure SQL service.
Hmm.
Not one. It's not one to one. It's not super clean and easy necessarily. It's not like click a button and now this entire SQL application is replicated um, up in Azure SQL. But it is doable, and there are some good benefits to doing it, and also some caveats.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Basically, if you've got clients and you want them to be able to order things, you could create an application, have that application live in the cloud, and then configure the application to talk to local resources if you have them, or there could be a SQL server in the cloud that the application talks to, and your users interact with that application. So
Sure.
if you do that, then you're accessing the cloud service provider's platform and modifying it, creating your own application in order to make that work.
Yeah, so they give you kind of the structure
Yep.
to, yeah, to allow that type of creation. But yeah, it's basically like you need like a software developer
Yep.
team for this type of stuff. The last one that's becoming more and more prevalent today in business is infrastructure as a service. What that means, it's managing the software, storage, and security of virtual servers that are running on someone else's hardware. So examples are Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, which I'm sure people have heard about on TV. What this really is you are renting a server in the cloud. So with SaaS applications, you are using an application that's on a server, and that's really all it is. You don't have any access to the operating system, the security, the storage of that server. This is similar in the sense that it's on a server, but you're renting the hardware. You're subscribing to the hardware in those data centers. So you have full capabilities on that server. You're responsible for patching the operating system, securing the antivirus, any sort of security around it. So it really is like having your own server locally, but you just can't see it. Yeah, so that's something that's becoming a lot more prevalent. I know we're trying to get a lot of our customers onto it because, well, I shouldn't say we're trying to. It's just
Yeah.
there's definitely the benefit of it. I mean,
We'll
we'll
get
get into the
into
pros and
shortly here.
cons. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like taking your on-premise environment and essentially just shifting it to the cloud. So instead of running it in your little server room,
Yeah.
um, you have a virtual host that runs virtual servers, and they're running in the cloud.
Yeah, and the biggest thing that I know you'll get into with the benefits and the accounting of it is there's no hardware that you have to
Right.
worry about.
Right. So general benefits. Cloud is scalable, which means if you need to add a new server, you can do that very quickly within a matter of minutes. You don't need to order a physical box and then wait for it to be delivered and then assemble it and then firmware update it and do all that kind of stuff. You click a couple buttons, you deploy a new server. Um, it's quick. It's also easy to shrink the number of resources that are running. And depending on how you deploy it, in some situations you might deploy multiple web servers that automatically increase in number depending on the amount of traffic. So if your business has a busy season, you might be able to have only one or two web servers running in the cloud, and that's sufficient. But when you get to your busy season, those one or two servers get overwhelmed. So based on demand, you can spawn additional web servers as part of your web server farm. Then when the demand decreases again, the number of web servers also decreases, right? So your billing goes up as you spawn new servers. Your billing goes down as you decrease new servers.
And that's as easy as just like toggling a button in the admin center, right? Like, hey, I need more storage or I need another server. You just
Yes.
kind of place it's ordering online basically, and then
Yeah.
Microsoft sees it and yeah,
Yeah.
they
What
assign that.
in the case of the web server farm, that example I was giving, there's some upfront config. You have to create the farm and you configure the parameters and that kind of thing. But once that's done, then yeah, it will grow on demand and then shrink on demand according to the parameters that you've described. Flexibility is just you can think of the cloud as being virtualization. So we've had server virtualization now for probably 20 years, and it made it much easier for us to deploy servers and other resources in our on-premises environments. The cloud is essentially just that. It's the same thing, except for it's even more convenient for us because it happens in the cloud space. We don't have to order the hardware. We don't have to maintain the hardware. We don't have to make sure there's enough hard disk space. We don't have to understand or think about whether or not the host has enough memory. All of that stuff is taken care of for us by the cloud services provider. Accessibility and collaboration. One of the reasons that companies sometimes choose to move to the cloud is that instead of having to manage perhaps multiple firewalls and multiple site-to-site VPNs and coming up with multiple ways for users from all different kinds of locations to be able to get to their resources that are running on-premise, and then having to manage all of those links, it's much easier to enable users individually, no matter where they're at, to access those resources when they're running in the cloud.
I've gotten that feedback from a lot of people about just like no longer needing VPN, like VPNing into the site to access resources locally on that server. Everything is just cloud applications, so all you need is Wi-Fi or internet, and you're good to go.
Right, and the collaboration bit here just talks about if instead of using a traditional file server, like a Windows file server, if you're using SharePoint as a kind of file server replacement, well, then multiple people can be editing documents at one time, and you can collaborate as you work through and edit and update a document. And then Teams is another great example. You could be in multiple chats with individual users and that kind of thing, and collaborate in real time. And that's the kind of functionality that's enabled by service running in the cloud. And then the other thing is disaster recovery and business continuity. You know, we're pretty good at getting those services configured for on-premises solutions. But if everything is already in the cloud, failing over from one cloud region to another is vastly simplified. So that's just another factor, depending on the scale of your deployment and whether you're cloud exclusive or not.
Yeah, when we do like an Azure build quote for a client, it'll have all the line items of exactly like what you're paying for, like, oh, you're paying for this much storage space, this much processing power. But there's another line item for backup, which is obviously super important. We don't have to worry about backup anymore at Ontech. They basically have their own backup system internally. I mean, like I said, they have these data centers that are huge, and they're all over the country, all over the world, and they do this thing called geolocation. Well, there's a few different ways they do it, but geolocation is the main one people think of, where my server, my Azure server, is living in, let's say, the Wisconsin data center, where I think there's one being built in Mount Pleasant. It's living there, but if it gets hit by a hurricane
NATO.
from Lake Michigan, which I know would never happen, if that data center gets hit by a hurricane or a tornado, the backup that we're paying for, Microsoft, they will basically relocate your server into a different data center, or even a different cluster within that data center. If one, a building catches fire, these data center, like these campuses they have, they're like hundreds of acres, like 20 buildings. That's where the cluster of buildings that they use. So if one catches fire, they can relocate all the servers in that building somewhere else. So the backup in DR is tremendously easier from Ontech's standpoint. Like there's really no DR simulation that we even have to do. Whereas if you have stuff locally, you kind of have to be on the ready for what happens if your building catches fire, or a flood or something.
Yep. You still always want a test.
Right.
So budgeting accounting, the first thing, answer to, do we want to go to the cloud? Do we want to take our company's compute environment and move it to the cloud? The answer may be yes. Very seldom is the reason, though, because it's cheaper. Right? The cloud isn't necessarily more expensive, but it very seldom is going to be cheaper. There are some situations when it might be, and as we go through some of these scenarios, we'll talk about that as a possibility. But you don't want to go into thinking about this as being a primarily saving money play. So what are some of the reasons, right? Well, we talked about the general benefits of the cloud in previous slide. But think about cloud as being an operational expense versus on-premises being primarily a capital expense, but then also there's operational costs involved. So when you've got cloud, when you've moved your business entities, your business resources to the cloud, you've got fewer of the really big kinds of costs and fewer of those sort of big surprise kinds of costs. Failed hardware, need to replace the SAN, need to replace the server system board, the downtime that's included with that. How long do you have to wait for replacement parts, that kind of thing. So you get a consistent set of monthly costs.
Yeah.
I've got a, go ahead.
The thing that I always forget about when we're quoting like servers, local like a hardware, is the warranty involved with that. Like we usually quote the 5-year warranty, which basically means if something fails on the server, Dell or HP will run out and replace the part so that we don't have to take a few days to order it, get it, bring it here, go install it. The warranty is expensive in itself. I mean, that's like for a 5-year warranty, which I think we usually quote, can be like $5,000. And then you have to renew the warranty after that if you're planning on keeping it. So, I mean, yeah, that's the not just the hardware, it's the warranty of the hardware, which really adds up.
Right. So cloud is an operational expense. You're a company's accounting folks might prefer operational practices versus periodic capital practices. The thing that's important to remember is that you do want to right size when you move to the cloud. We have some examples of customers who tried to just literally lift and shift. So they had a server in place on premise and they essentially replicated it into the cloud. Now, this is a few years ago when I worked with a different company, and a little embarrassed that we let them do it, but that's how they wanted it done. And they quickly realized within the first couple of months, oh boy, this is going to be expensive. Um, we were able to help them whittle that service down so that it was more right sized. So that instead of having two processors with 20 cores, one processor with 6 cores was more than sufficient for that service running in the cloud. Same with available disk space and the kind of disk that was provisioned for the server. Some disk provision types give you much better performance, but are also much more expensive. And many applications you don't need that faster disk. So you want to work with a provider to really understand what does this application need in the cloud, and let's make sure that when you move it to the cloud that it's right sized. So this next slide, is it right for you? What we're trying to get at here is we have the 3 cloud service types: SaaS, IaaS, and PaaS. This first slide is, okay, can I take my entire environment and get rid of anything that's on premise and put it all in the cloud? And the answer might be yes. If you've already got Office 365 or you're willing to move to Office 365. In other words, you might have the perpetual licensing of the old kind style Office that's not M365 or O365. If you're willing to move to that, that's cloud based. If you don't have any specialized CAD or CAM kinds of data types that are maybe sensitive to being stored in SharePoint, if you don't have a lot of very specific needs for device management of your PCs and that kind of thing, then Active Directory, file shares, all that can easily be moved to the cloud. And then if you've got ERP software or accounting software that has a cloud option that you like, then it's easy to move that to a cloud and then move everything else to, say, SharePoint and Microsoft Exchange. And now you can get rid of all your on-premise hardware and everything is cloud-based.
Yeah, that one I know people have a harder time migrating to because like QuickBooks and Sage, I know they offer cloud, cloud options, but they're super expensive from an OpEx standpoint, and there's not much customization with it. And yeah, I've got mixed reviews about people moving their ERP software to the cloud, but it's certainly an option.
Yeah, things like QuickBooks. I mean, QuickBooks on-prem and QuickBooks in the cloud are different. They have different strengths and they have different weaknesses. So if you want to get rid of your on-premise environment, you need to check out whether or not the cloud-based version of QuickBooks functions well enough for your workflow and your expectation.
Now, what you
Um,
could do, going back to the like QuickBooks, when they say QuickBooks Online, that's basically their data center where their servers are living and you're
yep,
accessing their stuff. But what we're talking about with IaaS, you could essentially keep, if you don't want to use the QuickBooks data center, you could take a server into
yep.
Azure with the QuickBooks installed on that server. So it's technically, I guess it's
So
local QuickBooks, and then access that. So like we're mentioning, there's different ways to do this.
you should switch the slides.
Switch the
It's all.
slides. All right, let's go.
So this next environment is cloud hybrid, and what we mean by that is you might have an on-premises file server, and you've decided that your file types support having everything live in SharePoint. Great. You migrate your file system to SharePoint. Now it's in a cloud service. But you might have on your server, maybe it's a domain controller, but maybe it's also got some kind of a specialized app. And that app isn't available in a cloud services kind of format. So if that's the case, or perhaps you've got Sage running on a local on-prem server, and you decided you don't like Sage's cloud option. It just doesn't work for your business and for your workflows. Well, you can create a server in the cloud and run Sage on that server, or run that special dispatching software that was running on your domain controller. Um, you might even also decide that, depending on the kind of files that exist in either of those applications, that you need to have some RDP sessions so that users, when they connect with a remote desktop, that that desktop that they're working from lives also in the cloud right next to where the data is, so that there's no latency in terms of them being able to get access to the data. If that's the case, then you're going to be leveraging the IaaS, the infrastructure as a service solution. So now you're a cloud hybrid.
Yeah, I ran into that with a client where they wanted to put Sage into the Azure environment on their server in Azure, but the way that Sage basically requires an RDP, an RD or an RDS server, I guess, in front of that. So they basically had to take they had to put two servers into Azure rather than just one because of that RDP, right? Is that okay.
Remote desktop protocol, and those RDP sessions run on an RDS server.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a caveat of sometimes moving certain applications into an IaaS format, is that vendor or that software provider may say, hey, you need to have an RDS server, basically in front of it as a jump box.
Right. And so the key here is just, cloud is not a one size fits all solution. Some clients, some customers have an environment that's perfectly suited to just move everything over to a SaaS solution, or
Yeah.
even a series of SaaS solutions. Um, Other companies, you have needs that aren't going to be fully satisfied through a SaaS solution. So you can move all or parts of your infrastructure into the cloud, leveraging infrastructure as a service. So the complexifiers here are specific file types. So, for example, um, CAD/CAM systems, many of them really can't keep those files in SharePoint because of the way SharePoint, differences in the way SharePoint stores files as compared to like a traditional file server. It just doesn't work. It's not recommended. You don't want to do it. So that requires then that if you're going to move it to the cloud, you need to understand that and realize that you're going to need to probably have a file server functionality in the cloud itself. Also, the whole RDS server thing, if you have any kind of custom apps. And then the other complexifier is, what's the total amount of storage that you've got? If you have a really huge on-premise file server, exceed the kinds of limits that SharePoint provides, depending on the licensing that you've got, it can get very, very expensive very, very quickly. And so then rather than pushing everything into SharePoint, your decision might be move these file types to SharePoint and then create a file server in the cloud so that people can access from there. And then finally, we've got the classic hybrid. Got a little bit of everything. You've got Office 365 or M365 with Outlook clients accessing cloud-based Exchange email and some general files, general Office kinds of files being accessed via SharePoint. But you've also got a domain controller running in the cloud, and you've got a Sage server running in the cloud. You've got some RDP sessions for various kinds of work. But yet you might have some on-premise needs. Maybe you still want or need a local Active Directory in order to do more fine-grained device control. Or maybe you've got a really huge set of data that it's just too expensive to move it all to the cloud.
Yeah, storage seems to be the one thing that it's better to, like, once you have a lot of storage, it's better just to buy local storage rather than subscribing to storage in the cloud, if that makes sense. Because it seems like that's always the biggest, like, price
Right,
thing.
and it depends whether all your data needs to be hot, or can some of it be
Archived or
sort of archived in cooler kinds of storage. So you want to investigate what you have and then right size the solution that best fits your environment, right? So talk to Ontech, let us help you figure out what's the best approach in terms of maximizing your minimizing your costs and maximizing the flexibility of your solution. So
yeah.
some case history solutions. Property management company that we work with, for years they had a local on-premise server, and they had Active Directory, and it was a file server, and it was also their print server. And then one day the inevitable happened. They kind of pushed off maintenance of the hardware and didn't want to spend a bunch of money, and eventually that hardware failed, and it failed catastrophically. And so we sat down with them and said, all right, let's look at what we need to do to get you back up and running. We can help you secure a new server, and there's this project work that has to happen to get it up and running, and then we'll have to do some restores because the data was all gone, and it's a big project, and there's a significant capital outlay. Or we could look at a temporary solution. They did have a NAS where they stored their backup data, and as a temporary thing, we had them access their restored data from the NAS. Then it's able to back up files like that from the NAS in an easy way that makes DR possible and all of that kind of thing. And so eventually the decision was made that they would be better off just getting rid of their on-premise hardware altogether and moving everything to a SaaS solution. And since doing that, they're super happy because it's so much simpler. They have a lot less maintenance that they need to do. There's a lot less worry about how users, when they're working from home and that kind of thing, can access their stuff.
Yeah, the
Dave,
other
I think
one,
you've got a good example of that middle case.
yeah, the cloud hybrid, where they have Office 365 and SharePoint. That's all in Microsoft, but they have a developer team using AWS. So Ontech really has no visibility into that. They don't want us looking at that at all. They just have a software team that works separately in AWS to create their apps. So yeah, I mean, we don't have any visibility into that environment. They have it separately. They got another vendor for that. But yeah, that's how they operate. Their corporate setting is all Microsoft, but their software team works in AWS.
Yep. And then the classic hybrid is you've got some cloud footprint and you've got some on-premise footprint. An insurance company that we work with, they have on-premise Active Directory and want to keep it for device management purposes primarily, and I think also because of familiarity. And they've also got a document imaging solution that files are too large and there's too many of them to have it be a good solution to move it to the cloud. But they do use SharePoint, and they also use IaaS because they've got a SQL Server and a web server that's running up in Azure. They've done their own custom development with the web server and with the SQL Server as well. So they've got that classic sort of hybrid, a little bit of everything except for at this point, platform as a service.
Yeah, and Peter, I just thought of a question that I got from a client where they are considering moving to the cloud. They have a really old domain controller, and they don't want to pay for the hardware, which nobody does. So they're considering moving. They're thinking about moving to SharePoint and Entra ID, which is like the Active Directory settings of that domain controller, which we didn't really talk about today. But so they want to move to SharePoint and Entra ID, which means they also have to increase their licensing with their Office licensing of Office 365. They also were thinking about moving the entire domain controller to Azure. So I guess in your opinion or what you've seen, is there much of a cost difference between that? I would say they have maybe a terabyte of data total. What do you think would be the best course of option? Do you think it would make sense to move that domain controller into like an IaaS?
A domain controller, depending on what else it's doing other than domain controlling, other than providing login services, doesn't burn through a lot of costs as a server in the cloud. So as long as it's, if
sorry, it was a hard question.
It's difficult to know without actually looking at the metrics of the individual case. But there's good scenarios where it would make sense to do that.
Okay, that's good to know. All right. So getting into some summary. The cloud is just another place your data lives. Yeah, I don't know how else to say it. It's a lot of stuff we use nowadays is the cloud, which just means it's the servers are somewhere else.
Yeah.
AAS is solutions that are delivered via the internet or as a service, which means you're subscribing to it. It's like your Netflix subscription. You're no longer buying DVDs and plugging them into your TV. You are paying to use Netflix's DVDs, and instead you're delivering those movies down to your TV via the internet. Environments can be on-prem, cloud-based, or hybrid. As we've mentioned, there's a ton of different ways to look at an environment and find the best solution. We would not recommend just moving to the cloud because it sounds easier. There's caveats to everything. There's definitely caveats to everything, and Ontech is supposed to be that consultant with our clients to make sure that people are doing the right thing. And
no, just plain lift and shift.
Right.
We've always got to look at it. Always want to be sure that we're right sizing. Always want to be sure that you're moving it to the cloud for the right reasons.
Yep. The cloud is scalable, flexible, super accessible with just internet. It really makes things easier from a management standpoint to just be like, hey, I want to add some resources here, take away some resources there, add people to it. I mean, it's super easy. And then the last one is OpEx versus CapEx from a budgeting standpoint. OpEx, going back to the Netflix example, is you're paying a subscription fee for all those movies instead of owning them. CapEx is you're going to buy all the hardware, all the DVDs, put them in your house. They take up some space. You might have to replace them every so many years. You drop them or whatever. But yeah, it's Netflix versus DVDs is really the analogy I use for OpEx versus CapEx.
That's a good one. I like that.
I'm a pretty smart guy, Peter. So
because I can't even wrap my head around having the Netflix library in my home.
Oh yeah, it's insane. Well, I mean, because I'm not a technical guy, when I started at Ontech, I had to figure out ways to explain this type of stuff to not only myself, but to like my parents. You know, my parents don't understand this kind of stuff. My family doesn't really understand it, but that's a good analogy for people to start wrapping their head around what the cloud is and, you know, other ways to think about it. So if you are interested in making a move, you know, we are obviously here to work with you, to consult, do a discovery as to what you have and what we think is the best solution, provide a scope of work, a quote. We can obviously help do all of that. But I think that's it. I think, yeah, thank you guys for joining. Sorry for the technical difficulties at the beginning. If you do have questions, please, you can throw them in the chat in the last couple minutes. Otherwise, you can reach out to Peter and myself. We are happy to have that discussion with you. So thank you again, and everybody stay warm, and yeah, have a great rest of your day.